It happened on a night when Seattle looked like it was drowning. Rain hammered the windshield, and the streetlights smeared into trembling streaks of gold. Daniel's hand was on the wheel. Chloe was in the back seat singing a school song, off-key and fearless, the way kids are when they believe grown-ups can fix anything. Then the world snapped. A truck drifted through an intersection like it didn't believe in red lights. Metal screamed. Glass burst. The seatbelt crushed my ribs. Airbags exploded. Chloe's song cut off mid-word. When I came back into my body, the car was tilted and the rain was inside with us, cold and sharp. Daniel wasn't moving. His head was turned at an angle that made my stomach reject reality. I remember screaming his name until my throat burned. I remember crawling toward Chloe, my hands slipping on shattered glass. She was alive. She was crying. And that sound her crying was the only reason I didn't break completely right there on the wet asphalt. The hospital smelled like disinfectant and panic wearing a clean uniform. In the ICU, the monitors beeped in a steady rhythm that felt like a countdown. A doctor with tired eyes took me aside. "Your husband, Daniel?" He paused. He didn't make it. The sentence tried to slide off my brain, but then he said Chloe's name, and that hooked me back into focus. "Your daughter is alive," he said, "but she has severe internal injuries. She needs a specialized surgery within 24 hours. 24 hours sounds like time. It isn't. It's a thin wire over a canyon. There's a specialist team in Boston," the doctor continued. "If you want them to operate, we need a deposit. $300,000 today." 300,000. I nodded like it was a grocery bill. "It's fine," I heard myself say. "We can do that." Because Daniel founded a tech company. We had a house. We had assets. We were not people who couldn't cover a deposit. On paper, in reality, my phone became a locked door. Our joint account frozen. The business account Daniel was the primary signer. The investment portal restricted pending legal documentation because the account holder had died. I called the bank anyway, sitting under a poster about hand washing and listening to hold music that sounded like it was recorded inside a microwave. I didn't have time to process Daniel being gone. Grief tried to rise, but the ICU swallowed it. Nurses moved with that calm urgency that says, "This is Tuesday for us." Someone asked for insurance information. Someone else asked if Chloe had allergies. I answered like a robot, because if I stopped being useful, I might collapse. When they let me see her, she looked impossibly small in the bed, eyelashes still too long for her face. A strip of tape held a tube in place. Her fingers were warm when I touched them, and I made a promise in my head because my mouth didn't trust itself yet. "I've got you." That was the moment the deposit became a weapon. Not because the hospital was cruel, they were honest. Because money, for some people, isn't a tool. It's leverage. I tried every card. I tried transferring from savings. I tried calling our accountant, then remembered Daniel handled the approvals. Each denied felt personal, like the universe was stamping a red letter across my forehead. Not authorized. And somewhere in that blur of alarms and fluorescent light, I realized something terrifying. On paper, I was Daniel's wife. In systems, I was nobody. That's when I heard Richard's shoes on the tile. Steady, unhurried, like time belonged to him instead, always. "I'm sorry for your loss," the representative said. "But we can't release funds without probate documentation." "Probate?" I repeated. "My daughter needs surgery today." "I understand," she said in a voice that did not understand anything. "But I can't override policy." Policy, paper, procedure. The three gods of modern suffering. Time didn't care about my paperwork. That's when Richard and Helen arrived. Daniel's parents walked into the ICU like they'd stepped into a boardroom. They wore grief the way you wear a suit. Pressed, appropriate, controlled. No shaking hands. No raw panic, just management. Helen took my hands between hers. Her fingers were cool, steady. "We're going to take care of Chloe," she said, voice soft as velvet. For one fragile second, relief cracked through my chest. Thank God, I thought. Thank God family still means something. Then Richard nodded once. Come with us, he said. They led me to a hospital conference room that smelled like bleach and stale coffee. 2 plastic chairs, a laminated table, and a framed photo of a beach that felt like an insult. A lawyer, at least. I assumed he was a lawyer because he wore a suit and carried a folder thick enough to ruin lives, sat at the end of the table. Richard placed the folder down with the calm finality of a man closing a deal. We'll pay the full cost, he said, but we need to make sure Daniel's assets are managed properly. Helen smiled gently. It's temporary, she added. You can't carry everything alone right now. The lawyer slid papers toward me. Transfer of house ownership. Transfer of company control. Authorization to control a trust fund. Everything. You want me to sign over our home? I said, voice low. And Daniel's company, while my daughter is on a ventilator? Richard didn't flinch. It's the responsible way, he said. We're making sure nothing gets messy. Messy. Behind the glass down the hall, Chloe lay still under a blanket, breathing with the help of machines. Her chest rose and fell like it was negotiating with the universe. I asked one question because it was the only thing I could still control. If I sign, I said, you pay immediately? Yes, Helen said without hesitation. I picked up the pen. My signature looked calm on the page. Desperation can make you steady. I signed the house. I signed the company. I signed the trust authorization. I signed everything. Richard exhaled like he'd been holding his breath. Helen gathered the papers as if she'd just collected receipts after a successful shopping trip. 30 minutes later, the deposit hit the hospital account. Chloe was wheeled into surgery. They thought they'd won. They thought I'd been desperate and blind. They thought I hadn't read closely. They were wrong. Stay for part 2, because what they didn't read was the only thing that mattered. And comment this. In my place, would you have signed anyway? Chloe survived the surgery. The Boston team moved with brutal precision, and when it was over, a surgeon came to me and said, she's stable. I didn't cry. I just kept breathing, like my lungs had been holding a grudge. Daniel, though Daniel was still gone. While Chloe slept under pain medication, the world kept asking for signatures, death forms, insurance forms, consent forms, ink everywhere, as if paperwork could organize grief into neat folders. Richard and Helen stayed close, but not in a comforting way. They hovered like supervisors. They spoke to doctors before I could. They asked about billing, not Chloe's nightmares. Helen corrected staff on pronunciations like that mattered more than the IV running into my daughter's arm. I called my lawyer. Michael Turner answered on the second ring, and the moment I said, Daniel's gone, his voice sharpened into focus. Tell me exactly what you signed, he said. I told him. House, company control, trust authorization. There was a pause, just long enough to make my skin go cold. Emily, he said, that isn't temporary. That's a transfer. Get me copies. Today. For the first time since the crash, time wasn't chasing me with a knife. Chloe's monitor had softened from a countdown into background noise. That was when the second thought arrived, quiet but sharp. They thought they'd taken everything. But 3 months before the accident, Daniel and I had done something small, technical, and at the time boring. We'd restructured the company. Daniel was paranoid in the way good founders become paranoid. Not about enemies, but about chaos, lawsuits, regulators. One bad contract turning into a wildfire. He wanted the company protected if something went wrong. So we separated the core intellectual property from the operating company. He stayed CEO. The company stayed the brand, payroll, clients, contracts, but the patents, the heart of what we sold, were transferred into my name. Not to hide anything. To make me the firewall. We'll license it back, Daniel had said one night at the kitchen table. If anything ever happens, the tech doesn't get trapped. The license agreement was boring, except for one clause. If control of the company changed without my written consent, the license to use the patents would automatically terminate. No warnings, no grace period. Automatic. Richard and Helen had forced me to sign over control, without my consent to the change. which meant the moment Richard took control, he stepped on the switch himself. Michael read the transfer packet, then pulled out a stapled appendix marked Schedule 17. "Did they read this?" he asked. I let out a humorless laugh. They didn't even read the hospital menu. Michael tapped the clause. Then they bought a company that doesn't own what it sells. 2 weeks later, Chloe came home. Our old house was no longer ours, so we moved into a small apartment near her school. The kitchen was so narrow that if you opened the fridge and the oven at the same time, you'd invent a new kind of physics. Chloe didn't care. She was alive. She liked that I was always within reach. Richard and Helen, meanwhile, posed like they'd inherited a kingdom. Richard visited the office. Helen talked about legacy. Photos appeared online, the company logo behind them, smiles that said, "We saved the family." I let them. Because I wasn't ready to strike while Chloe still flinched at sudden noises. I wasn't ready to pour gasoline on a fire while she was learning how to sleep again. But the day her doctor finally said, "She's out of danger," I called Michael. "Send it," I said. He drafted the notice to the company in language so clean it could cut glass. The patent license was revoked. Effective immediately. No right to use the core technology. No legal ability to sell the product. No contracts relying on our proprietary system. Richard called within hours. His voice, for the first time, wasn't smooth. "Emily," he said, clipped and shaking at the edges. "What is this?" "It's the contract," I said. "The one you activated when you took control." "This is family," he snapped. "My family is 8 years old," I said quietly. "And she almost died." Helen tried next. Softer. "You're hurting everyone," she said. "I'm stopping you," I replied. "There's a difference." They threatened to sue. Michael responded with one attachment. The license agreement signed by Daniel and signed again by Richard, because Richard had insisted on full transparency and had initialed every acknowledgement page like a man who believed signatures were trophies. He had signed the clause that destroyed him. That was when their lawyer finally read what mattered and turned pale. The fallout was immediate and ugly. By the next morning, the company's sales team was frozen. A major client demanded confirmation that the next shipment was legal. The support inbox filled with questions no one could answer without mentioning the one thing everyone was avoiding. The product's brain wasn't theirs anymore. Employees who had never met Richard started whispering in hallways. The board requested an emergency call. Daniel's old co-founder texted me a single sentence. "What did they do?" Richard tried to pretend it was a temporary technical hiccup. He sent a company-wide email full of vague reassurances and bolded phrases like, "business as usual." It lasted 6 hours before legal stopped him from sending anything else. Then the pressure turned toward me. A distant aunt I hadn't spoken to in years called to tell me I was being selfish. Daniel's cousin sent a paragraph about family unity. Helen's church friend left a voicemail praying I would soften my heart. None of them mentioned the conference room. None of them mentioned Chloe's ventilator. They just wanted the peace of not choosing sides. And beneath all of it, Richard's tone shifted from outrage to fear, because fear is what happens when rich people realize the ground can move under them. He didn't ask about Chloe once. Not once. He only asked, "How do we fix this?" I stared at my daughter's sleeping face and felt something settle into place inside me. A decision that wasn't rage anymore. It was clarity. "You fix it," I said, "by undoing what you did." That was when Richard stopped calling like a father and started calling like an opponent. He hinted at court. He hinted at taking Chloe for visits. He hinted at telling people I was unstable. Every hint sounded like a threat. Stay for part 3 because once the patents disappeared, the masks did too. Comment. Would you ever forgive them? The first lawsuit arrived like junk mail. A courier asked for Emily Carter and handed me a thick envelope sealed with the kind of seriousness people use when they want you afraid. Chloe was coloring at the kitchen table, still moving carefully because her body remembered pain. "What's that?" she asked. "Grown-up paperwork," I said, forcing a smile. "Boring stuff." Inside, it wasn't boring. In bold letters, Misappropriation, bad faith, tortious interference. Richard and Helen were accusing me of sabotaging their company and demanding an injunction to force me to reinstate the patent license. I drove straight to Michael's office. He read, stacked the pages, and leaned back with the calm of a man who had seen rich people panic before. "It's intimidation," he said. "They're hoping you'll blink. Can they win?" I asked. "Not on the license issue," Michael said. "The termination clause is automatic, and the trigger is the change of control, exactly what they forced." He tapped a line. Richard also signed acknowledgments that he received the restructuring packet. That makes it harder for him to pretend he didn't know. So they threw punches anyway. Messages started coming in from people who suddenly cared about family peace. "Think about Chloe," they wrote. Like Chloe was a pawn instead of a person. I blocked numbers. I kept my voice gentle at home, because the only thing Chloe needed from me was steadiness. Then Richard crossed a line. I went to pick Chloe up from school and saw Richard and Helen near the gate, standing in the drizzle like they belonged there. Helen held a bright umbrella. They were talking to my daughter with soft faces, the kind adults use when they're trying to plant something in a child's mind. Chloe saw me and her smile flickered. That tiny flicker was a punch to the lungs. In the car, she asked, quietly, "Mom, did Grandpa say you stole from them?" I gripped the steering wheel until my knuckles ached. Heat rose behind my eyes, not tears rage. "No, baby," I said. "I didn't steal anything." "But they said you're trying to take their house and the company," she whispered. "They're lying," I said, keeping my voice calm on purpose. "And they're not allowed to talk to you anymore. Not ever." That afternoon, I called the school and removed them from every list. I signed new forms. I made sure staff knew exactly who was allowed to approach my child. Michael drafted a cease and desist that read like a door slamming. No contact with Chloe, no interference at school, all communication through counsel. They responded by showing up at my apartment. It was a Saturday. Chloe was napping. I opened the door and found the three of them on my mat. Richard, Helen, and Daniel's sister Vanessa, because every family has someone willing to deliver guilt if it keeps them comfortable. Helen held a cake like it was a peace offering. Vanessa held a gift bag. Richard held nothing, because Richard never brought offerings. Richard brought expectations. Helen's voice trembled, practiced. "We were grieving," she said. "We weren't thinking clearly," Richard added. "Let's not make this ugly. We just want to see Chloe," Vanessa said, eyes pleading. I didn't move aside. "She's asleep," I said. Helen's smile tightened. "We can wait." "No," I said. The velvet moved. The blade showed. Richard's eyes narrowed. "Emily," he said quietly, "you're damaging the family's future." "My daughter is the future," I said. "And you used her emergency like a bargaining chip." Helen's face hardened for a second, then softened again. "We paid for her surgery," she said, as if money was a halo. "You paid after you took everything," I replied. "That's not help. That's extortion." Richard took a slow breath. "Drop the patent issue," he said. "We'll discuss visitation, and we'll consider letting you stay in the house." "Letting me—" "No," I said. Helen inhaled sharply. "Emily, this conversation is over," I said. "Leave." Richard's voice dipped colder. "We can drag you through court for years." "I know," I said. "And you still can't sell a product without my patents." For the first time, I saw it, real fear behind his eyes. Then I closed the door. Not slammed. Closed like a period at the end of a sentence. 2 days later, Michael called. "They want to settle," he said. "What are they offering?" I asked. "They'll return the house and the company control," he said. "They want you to reinstate the patent license." I laughed once, short and tired. "That's not a settlement," I said. "That's undoing their theft." "My terms," I said, "are the house, the control, and $200,000 for what they did in that hospital." "And Chloe?" Michael asked. "A signed agreement," I said. "No contact, no interference ever again unless Chloe asks for it when she's older." Michael exhaled. I'll send it. Their reply came the next morning. Not an apology. A counterattack dressed as compromise. Richard offered to return the home after a transitional period, which was a fancy way of saying, after we squeeze you a little longer. Helen wanted supervised family time with Chloe, which was a fancy way of saying, we still get access to her feelings, even if we don't get access to your signatures. And then they tried the oldest trick in the book. They offered money as bait. 100,000 if I signed a new license agreement granting them permanent rights to the patents. Permanent. No termination. No consent requirement. Just my name welded to their control forever. Michael called it what it was. They're trying to buy the key back, he said, and they're still pretending they deserve it. That night, Chloe woke up from a nightmare and found me in the kitchen staring at the rain on the window. Mom, she whispered, are they mad at us? I knelt beside her and smoothed her hair. They're mad at consequences, I said softly. Not at you. Never at you. She nodded, but her small hands clung to my shirt like she was afraid people could take me away with paperwork. In that moment, my anger stopped being hot. It became cold, clean, and permanent. I told Michael, no half measures. If they want peace, they sign what we sent. Because if I gave them an inch, they would turn it into a leash, and I was done wearing leashes. Part 4 is where they discover what surrender actually feels like. Comment. Was my condition about Chloe too harsh? Or the only thing that mattered? They didn't accept right away. For a week, nothing happened except silence and weather. Seattle kept raining like it was trying to wash the city clean. Richard's lawyers filed motions. Michael filed responses. The company's revenue graph began to look like a cliff. Without the patents, everything Daniel had built was suddenly a shell. They could keep the lights on for a while, sure. They could pay a few salaries. They could bluff to clients, but they couldn't deliver what they'd sold, and in tech, bluffing is a short fuse. Behind the scenes, the board started asking hard questions. Investors started calling. A key client threatened to terminate and demanded damages. And Richard, who had treated the company like a trophy, realized it was actually a machine one that now refused to start without the engine I owned. Michael kept me updated, but he also kept me human. Your leverage is real, he said. Don't let their pressure make you sloppy. Pressure arrived anyway, in its prettiest costume. On a Thursday evening, Helen left a voicemail. Her voice was soft, trembling, careful. I know you think we're the enemy, she said, but Daniel would want unity. He would want Chloe surrounded by family. Please, don't let anger ruin what's left. I listened once, then deleted it. Daniel would want Chloe alive. Daniel would want Chloe safe. Daniel would want me to stop anyone from using her as a handle to control our lives. 2 days later, Michael called. They're ready, he said. Ready for what? I asked, though I already knew. Full settlement, he replied. They'll return the house. They'll return the company control. 200,000. And they'll sign the non-interference agreement for Chloe. I exhaled. Slow. Relief tried to rise, but I didn't let it. Relief can make you careless, and I wasn't done yet. Where? I asked. Not the hospital, he said. Neutral office. Notary. Friday. Friday came gray and wet. Michael's office chose a small downtown suite that smelled like toner and lemon cleaner. The kind of place where people sign documents that change lives and then go eat lunch like nothing happened. Richard arrived first. He looked older than 2 months ago, as if the weight of consequences had accelerated time. His posture was still straight, but his eyes weren't calm anymore. They scanned the room the way a man scans an exit. Helen followed, polished but pale. Her lipstick was perfect. Her hands were not. She kept clasping and unclasping them in her lap, trying to hide that they trembled. Vanessa came last, clutching her purse like it was the last thing she still owned. She didn't look at me. She looked at the paperwork, like if she stared hard enough it might rearrange itself into a different ending. No cake this time, no gift bag, no performance, just paper. The notary placed 2 stacks on the table. Michael sat beside me, calm as stone. Richard's lawyer sat beside him, tight-lipped, the kind of man who had just discovered that arrogance is not a legal strategy. Michael spoke first. "These documents return ownership of the house to Emily Carter," he said, tapping the first stack. "These return control of the operating company. These confirm that all equity transfers executed under duress are rescinded." Richard flinched at the word duress, but he didn't argue. Not anymore. Michael slid the next page forward. "This is the settlement payment," he said. $200,000. Wire today." Helen's jaw tightened. Vanessa's fingers went white around her pen. "And this," Michael said, voice flat, "is the child protection agreement." He didn't call it that on paper. The paper used softer words. Non-interference, no contact, no school access, no social media, no third-party communication intended to influence, pressure, or manipulate. But that's what it was. A legal fence around Chloe. Helen's eyes flicked to me. "This is extreme," she whispered. I met her gaze. "So, was that conference room?" I said. Silence. Richard's lawyer cleared his throat. "We'd like one modification," he said. "A clause allowing contact if the child requests it." Michael nodded once. "It's already included," he said. "When she's an adult. Voluntary. Written." Richard's pen hovered like it weighed 1,000 pounds. For a moment, I thought he might refuse out of spite, out of pride, out of the last shred of control he hadn't yet lost. Then he signed. The sound of pen on paper was small, but it felt like a door locking. Helen signed next. Her hand shook, and she pressed hard enough to dent the page, like she was trying to stab the ink into place. Vanessa signed last. She didn't hide her anger. Her jaw was tight, her eyes bright with hatred she would never admit to in public. Then it was my turn. I signed steadily. Because this wasn't revenge. This was repair. The notary stamped. Pages were copied. Pens were capped. Lawyers exchanged the dull, polite phrases of people who have watched lives shift across tables for a living. Michael checked his phone. "Wire is in," he said quietly. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I didn't give them the satisfaction of seeing me celebrate. Richard stood up first. He didn't look at me when he left. He looked at the floor, like the tiles had answers he couldn't argue with. Helen paused at the doorway. For half a second, her face looked almost human, almost grieving. Then she straightened her shoulders and followed Richard out. When the door closed, the room felt bigger. Michael gathered the papers. "You did what you had to do," he said. I stared at the stamped pages and felt the strangest thing. Not triumph, but exhaustion. Like I'd been holding my breath since the accident, and my body was finally allowed to exhale. On the way home, rain streaked the car windows again, but it sounded different now, less like punishment, more like background. I drove past the exit that led to our old neighborhood and realized I could take it again. Not as a visitor. Not as a woman begging for permission. As Chloe's mother. As Daniel's partner. Still standing. At last. That night, Chloe ate soup on the couch and asked what we were having for dinner tomorrow, like the world had always been safe. I kissed her forehead and told her, "Anything you want." Part 5 is the aftermath, the quiet part people don't film. Subscribe if you want the ending, and comment right now. Would you have demanded the money too, or only the house in control? We moved back into the house the week the papers were signed. Fast. Quiet. No celebration. No welcome home balloons. The room still smelled faintly like someone else's perfume, and I didn't want to party in a place that had been used as a weapon. Chloe walked through the hallway like she was meeting a ghost. She touched the banister, the wall, the edge of the kitchen counter, as if she needed physical proof that the house wouldn't disappear again. That first night, she asked the question I'd been waiting for. "They can't make us leave again, right?" "No," I said. "They can't." I said it like a promise, and for the first time I believed it without checking the locks twice. Grief didn't care about legal documents. Some mornings I still reached for Daniel's mug before remembering there would be no warm voice behind me, no footstep in the hallway, no half smile as he stole the first sip of coffee. Sometimes Chloe would laugh, and for half a second my brain expected to hear Daniel laugh back. Then the silence would hit like a sudden drop. But grief and safety can exist in the same room. One doesn't cancel the other. The company, once it was back under my control, didn't magically heal. It stabilized because I knew the boring work. Payroll, client calls, product roadmaps, the quiet discipline Daniel had lived by. The board met with me like I was new, then realized I'd been there all along. People stopped whispering when they saw I wasn't leaving. Michael helped me draft a new license agreement too, one that protected the company without handing me a weapon I didn't want to carry forever. The patents stayed in my name, but the business had clear, fair rights to use them as long as I approved any major control change. No more loopholes, no more surprises, and the Boston surgeon sent a follow-up report that I kept folded in my wallet for months. Chloe's recovery was excellent. Her scars faded into thin, pale lines. Like reminders the body can survive what the mind still struggles to name. Richard and Helen did not recover the way they expected. People talk. People always talk, especially in a city where money and reputation live in the same closet. Someone at the company leaked the truth about the patent shutdown. Someone else mentioned the hospital conference room. Another employee told a friend about Richard showing up at a school gate to whisper accusations to an 8-year-old. Invitations dried up. The charity board Helen loved stopped returning her calls. A couple they used to vacation with suddenly became busy. Richard's golf group found polite excuses. In public they smiled, but the smiles became thinner, more cautious, like everyone had quietly agreed not to stand too close. Vanessa tried to pretend nothing happened, posting photos of brunch and sunsets like a filter could erase the last year. But even her captions changed, less blessed, more vague. Occasionally, I received a message from an unknown number, a sentence that started with, "I'm sorry," and ended with, "but." I never replied. Apologies with conditions are just negotiations. The non-interference agreement did its job. Richard and Helen didn't come near Chloe. They didn't show up at school. They didn't send gifts through someone else. They didn't try to slip into her life by pretending to be harmless. And Chloe slowly stopped flinching at sirens. A year after the accident, she sat at the kitchen table one afternoon, drawing with colored pencils. She drew our house, a stick figure me, a stick figure her, and then, after a long pause, a stick figure Daniel with a big smile. She added a small heart above his head like she was marking where love goes when bodies don't. Then she asked, without looking up, "Does Grandma hate me?" The question landed softly, but it had weight. I set my pen down. I didn't rush. Chloe deserved truth that didn't bruise. "No," I said. "She doesn't hate you." Chloe frowned. "Then why did she do all that?" "Because some adults forget what matters," I thought. Because some adults treat love like a contract. Because power feels safer than kindness to people who don't know how to be small. Out loud, I said, "Sometimes grown-ups get scared, and when they're scared, they make selfish choices." Chloe nodded slowly, then looked at her drawing and asked, "Like when I don't read my homework and then I panic?" I almost laughed, because kids will always drag wisdom into the simplest places. "Like that," I said, and kissed the top of her head. "Except you're learning." They didn't. That night, after Chloe went to bed, I stood in the doorway of her room and watched her sleep. The monitor beeps were gone now. The ventilator was a memory. The rain still hit the windows sometimes, but it no longer sounded like the end of the world. I missed Daniel, with a quiet ache that would probably live in me forever. On Daniel's birthday, Chloe and I drove to the waterfront where he used to clear his head. We brought 2 paper boats, folded from blue construction paper. Chloe wrote, "I love you, Dad," on hers in shaky capital letters. I wrote, "Thank you" on mine. We set them on the water and watched them drift until the rain blurred them into distance. Then we went home. But I also felt something else. Pride. not the loud kind. The kind that comes from protecting your child when the people who should have protected her tried to use her. Richard and Helen thought I signed in desperation. I did sign in desperation. But I also signed with knowledge they didn't have. The knowledge that control isn't the same as ownership, and that greed makes people sloppy. They didn't read Schedule 17. They didn't understand that the heart of the company was never theirs to take. And the truth is, I didn't do it to punish them. I did it to stop them from ever holding my daughter hostage again financially, emotionally, or legally. So tell me, if you were in my position one night of rain, one husband gone, one child hanging on, would you have done anything differently? Would you have signed? Would you have sprung the trap? And would you have demanded the settlement money? Or would you have walked away the moment Chloe was safe? If this story kept you reading, subscribe for more original tales and drop your answer in the comments. I read them all.